Riversea Gallery with Richard Rowland and Randy McClelland to explain the anagama process.
Why don't you go ahead, Randy?
That's explain the anagama process. Well, that's a tough thing to do. I think it's these pots in this exhibition were fired at the Ahikaaroa kiln in Astoria, Oregon. It was probably, I think, the 7th time we fired this kiln after firing the Astoria Dragon Kiln for many years, 3 decades, I think we fired the Astoria Dragon Kiln. It's fired with wood. Our particular kiln takes about 7, 8, 9 cords of wood that we cut up and we prepare for 4 or 5 months prior to the firing. The wood comes from our community and a variety of different species: alder, fir, Doug fir, some maple, things like that. And we load the kiln for 3 days. It takes about 3 days, preferably longer to load the kiln. It takes a lot of thinking to place the pots in there. We begin the firing, and we usually fire for about 105 to 110 consecutive hours after the warm-up to a temperature of around 2,400 degrees. And then we let the kiln cool for about 2 weeks before we unload. And that's like maybe a very literal explanation of the wood fire process, but I'm sure, Richard, you have more to add to that.
Yeah, I do. Maybe a little. In the anagama process, it's pretty natural to form the curve of the firing, and the curve kind of looks like a bell curve, and so we try to keep it within 150, 200 degrees per hour firing, and so we follow that natural curve of that's formed with the wood in burning in the kiln. And so we fire it up to 2,400 degrees Fahrenheit, and we hold it there for about 40 hours. So that's what happens. We use about 15 people in the last firing. We had about 15, is that right?
Yeah.
And normally we have maybe between around 20 people. So this firing happened where people had to do 2 6-hour shifts in the firing. We normally do 6 hours, and that's the reason for that is that's tied to the incoming and outgoing tide of the ocean. And so we're looking for ways to become connected to the natural processes of trees growing from particular soils, particular habitats where we get the wood is wet, which would be alder. In the higher elevations, we get Doug fir and maple from the valley. And so we try to take advantage of the natural process in order to become more connected to where we live and who we are and the people we live with and so on.
Tell us about how you use the different types of wood in the firing. Is it a mixture all at once, or do you control it in some way?
The hardwoods are normally used at the beginning of the firing because they don't burn as quickly, and so we don't have to put as much in to warm up the kiln. But the softwoods like conifers like Doug fir and spruce and hemlock are used later in the firing where we want the fire to get hot quickly because they burn so quickly. And also the outcome of the type of ash on the pots are a result of a unique species like Doug fir or maple or alder. And so we can identify the type of ash and tree that we burn by looking at these pots, because we've been doing it for Randy's been doing it for about 20 years or 30 years, and I've been doing it about 40 years. And we're finally beginning to understand what the outcome of these particular species provide to the pond.
So you've done well over your 10,000 hours of mastery.
Apparently. Yeah, apparently. Randy, want to talk about it?
Well, that's what they say, right? 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, wood fire, a lot of hours. I think a lot of hours are spent prepping the wood. It's a lot of labor, actually. I mean, getting ready for this last firing, we probably started cutting wood in
And late summer.
I mean, like right after the last firing, we started cutting wood.
Okay.
And it, every week we're either collecting it or getting it from, there are some contributions made in the community that help us with our efforts. There's a lot of wood just locally available as well too. So we're cutting wood every weekend. Sometimes you don't even get to make the pots. You don't really start making work until the wood's ready. So the quicker you can get the wood ready, the sooner you can get into your studio and start making work. And but yeah, it's a lot of time and a lot of effort, I think, to do this. But as you can see in the results, it's pretty magical. I think you don't get this in a gas kiln or electric kiln for sure. So not to say that those aren't fun either. I like doing all three of those. So
the variation that you get with wood fire is quite wide, and so you'll have one area in the kiln that'll be fairly cool, and then you'll have another area in the kiln that'll be really hot, and so you get this variation that's reflective on the way we feel about our community. We get diversity, variation, uncertainty, and sort of this unknowable process, because we continue to learn, and we're measuring the process as much as we can through the firings with pyrometers and cones and visually looking at the kiln. But there's so much uncertainty because of all the different aspects that are involved in the process, like how much moisture is in the wood. Did it rain during the whole firing? Did we get wind during the firing that blew the flame back out the way that it went in? And so we get this variation that we can't understand. And so, and that's where I like to be, and I think Randy likes to be, is in this uncertain environment where anything can happen and anything can reveal itself.
So your kiln is a hillside kiln.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little bit about that, the size of it, and it's at a specific angle, I believe?
Mm-hmm.
Well, anagama in Japanese is translated as a sloping hill kiln. So that's like the kiln is made and designed to fire like the traditional anagama kilns from Japan. So how big is it? Gosh, it's big. We could put a lot of work in. I mean, it varies depending on are we firing a whole lot of coffee cups, for the Cancer Center, for example, or soup bowls for our soup bowl project, or in an exhibition like this. But the best way to describe it is, for myself, I'm, almost 5'9", I think, on a good day. I can stand up straight, on the floor, and the ceiling doesn't touch my head, like in the biggest part of the kiln. Picture like the beached whale that we just saw in Cannon Beach, the other day. But it's shaped like that, almost about 30 feet.
Yeah,
30 feet. And the incline's about 20%, 24% incline from the front to the back. You can stand at the stack, at the base of the stack in the back, and you can look down, and you're above, like the front person stoking the kiln. So it's a pretty good incline up. So if that's some description, you might have a few more things to
There's yeah, sure. There's a wall in the back of the interior of the kiln, excuse me. That's called a sistema, and it's a firewall that's open in the brick, with brick wall with open holes in the firewall, and it makes the fire turn back when it goes in and hits that wall in the back. It circles over the pots and comes back toward the pots and then goes out. But I would call the kiln a downdraft or cross draft, because fire goes in one end and fire goes across the pots up an incline 24 degrees and then goes out the chimney. And so the chimney flame we continue to monitor, because we know where the fire is. If it comes out the chimney, if it comes a little bit higher, we know where the fire is. We're always monitoring our interaction with the fire. And to me, that's the way they used to do it in the old days, is it would just do visual inspection and no pyrometers, but we have a pyrometer and cones, so we know how hot it is. We know how much ash we have on the pots by visual inspection. And also we pull out cone circles of clay in the firing. We pull them out of the kiln in the latter part of the firing to see how much ash buildup is on the cones. So there's various ways, and when Randy comes on, he has his way of doing it. When I come on, then I have a different way, and everyone has a slightly different way of monitoring the kiln. And it's all okay within a certain boundary in order to get the work out.
And I understand there's no certainty if a work will survive the fire. You're waiting for 2 weeks of cooling and you don't know what survived.
One thing, that was a great question, Janine. One thing I like about the cooling is it gives you time to contemplate. And so you have a 2-week contemplation where you wonder about what happened. And in that way, it kind of prepares you to have the good questions when you open up, what happened to that? Why did that happen? And so you have time to think about it. It isn't just a process where we're not thinking. It's a process where we're always attentive and thinking all the time, especially in the cooling in a way. Yeah, because then we're thinking about the outcome. Anything on that?
Yeah, you learn to not have expectations, really. I mean, it's a good practice in life anyways, right? Not to have great expectations on things. And but it's a bummer sometimes when you spend you spend 6 months making work, and then, not a good portion, but a few pieces don't make it or whatever, but you learn from it. You move on quickly, and there's always something to look at. Anything that comes out of that kiln, there's so much to look at and learn from, and whether it's something that's here in the gallery or something that didn't quite make it, it's just a process. And hopefully, I haven't taken the best notes as an artist, but hopefully, I'm getting better at understanding what materials I'm using, things like that. And the other part about it too, I think, is what makes really good work sometimes is taking risks. Sometimes you have to just have a little bit of faith after some minimal amount of testing of materials. When you test in a wood fire, you only get 2 times a year really in our kiln to test in a wood kiln, and all wood kilns are a little bit different too. One test in our kiln can come out drastically different than another wood fire kiln. But you take some risks, you add some local material to your work, things like that, and sometimes they come out amazing, and sometimes there's a big crack in it, or thermal shock happens, and it's something I experience quite a bit in my pieces. So,
I guess you can think of, Randy, of the process of layering. And so we layer about every 6 hours. We put on a layer of wood, the falling ash, and the flowing ash. That's one layer. And then you keep adding layers on top of that and then you have a sort of textural skin on the outside of the pot that is pretty complex. And so, like Randy says, it takes a long time to figure out what you're looking at. I may look at a pot for 3 years before I ask Sinead, is it good enough to show in your, you know, I may look at a pot that long because you want to learn from the pot before it goes away. It's sort of like the final chapter in a book. And then the new chapter it'll start is when people buy the piece or purchase the piece and interact with it in their own way. And so all those considerations are really inspiring. And so we're continuously inspired by all this community that we work with. So Randy and I guess, think of the work as living organisms, an organism that continues to interact with an environment and came from a living system.
Thank both of you so much.
Mhm.
It's very interesting
Yeah.
to learn more about
Yeah.
this.